Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is our second class of being Muslim. We're covering the obligations, the fiqh for worship. Last week we did kind of a grand overview of the topic, introduction to the science of Islamic sciences, particularly fiqh. And today we're going to dive right in with obligations for purification, which is the fiqh of tahara. I got a couple copies of the text, being Muslim, for the English version, and I've got in front of me the Arabic of the Matn al-Shmuiyah, the Maliki text that we're using as well. These are free, so take advantage of that, alhamdulillah. We had a wonderful donation come in online last week, so thank you for that. And it's covered all of these texts for everyone. So if anyone does want to make any contribution, just put that in for the Masjid Sadaqah box. Not just going to the Masjid. Fiqh of Tahara. We'll just dive right in. Bismillah. The opening here, I know there's quite a bit in the actual book itself. Let me just show you. We're going to actually jump in, because this book, the Being Muslim text, covers everything. It covers a little bit of Aqidah. At the very beginning, it covers all 5 of the main pillars, including the zakat and the hajj, which we mentioned we're not covering because those aren't obligations upon every Muslim. And then as a whole bunch else, it's got a section on the seerah, the life of the Prophet, history there. I think it goes off a little bit into the righteous companions as well. It's got a little bit of tafsir of Quran, and then a really big glossary as well, English versus Arabic in terms of terminology at the very end. The section that we are really going to be at is chapter 3, which starts on page 37. And we're only going to be looking as far today as, I think it's page 54. So roughly 15, 20 pages is all we're really going to be covering today. But I did want to mention this because the beginning of Matn al-Shmuiyah has a really beautiful introduction, and the scholars I was studying this with had a couple things I wanted to highlight in this. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, we always begin with the Bismillah, and that's a very important thing. The Sheikh, Imam, and scholar of the highest caliber, Abd al-Bahri al-Ashmawi Rifaiyu, may the mercy of Allah, the Exalted, be upon him. He said, "Some of my friends requested me to prepare an introductory text about the fiqh of the madhab of Imam Malik bin Anas. Allah be well pleased with him. So I responded to it, hoping for a reward." And the key highlight was that when we study these things, we should hope for a similar reward for ourselves. The scholar, Imam al-Shmuiyah, he compiled this knowledge, which is just a highlight of what there is in the full madhab, the school of Islamic jurisprudence, which blankets itself under the scholarship of Imam Malik bin Anas, one of the students of the Tabi'in. And so, anyhow, like I said, we should be looking forward to a similar reward in our study of this. Some of those that we mentioned last week included the benefits of making right our actions, certainty in them, and finding the benefit and actually reaping the benefit of doing things in the correct way. And of course, most importantly, preservation from the hellfire, which is, inshallah, what we should all be striving for the utmost. One quote here as well. This is a hadith from the Prophet, actually. Can't call that a quote. In translations, the people will beat their camels to find knowledge, and they will find none more knowledgeable than the scholar of Medina. This is something that the companions in the first 100 years, the Muslims, they kind of unified and said that this was referring to Imam Malik. Although there were many, many wonderful scholars, he's the one that the consensus, the ijma, tended to be about this. So I just wanted to say a few more things about Imam Malik, since this is all coming down, passing down through him, the stuff that we're studying. Imam Malik is kind of defined as a scale upon which you could measure other scholars. And I, by that I mean he took from so many scholars that we should look at this and say, if I'm to call myself a scholar, do I even compare to what Imam Malik was? Over 900 scholars is what he took from as his teachers. 60 of them were tabi'in, which is the generation right after the Sahaba, the children of the Sahaba, basically. So, subhanAllah, it's an absolute amazing thing that he had that ability and access living there in Medina for this, and was able to be just an absolute figure in the religion, subhanAllah. Something important as well, he wanted to be a singer when he was a child, and his mother's actually the one that played a very significant role in his life in developing him as a scholar, encouraging it throughout, financing it for a part, and really played a huge part in his path on pursuing knowledge. And I wanted to highlight that because as women, as mothers, it's an important thing for us to encourage our children to learn these things. Living here in the West, it's not always easy for them to be as interested in the Islamic sciences as it is maybe astronomy, biology, chemistry, physics, things like that, in the secular studies, which are all very important and have their place. However, we do not want to neglect our own Islamic sciences. These are foundational, and they are important, and it is, so another term, fard kifaya, that's the communal obligation. Is a communal obligation that there are people in the community that are studying and teaching these things, and if they are not, then that entire community is at fault for a sin for that. So we do need these people, and the easiest way is to remind and encourage our wives and mothers to encourage their children to become scholars. Johannes, I have a text for you. If you'd like.
Yes, sir.
Oh.
Thank you, sir.
Another thing, many of Malik's teachers, Imam Malik's teachers, actually even narrated from him. So, and I'll obviously cover this one as well. Malik was both a fiqhi and a muhaddith. So he was a scholar of fiqh and he was a scholar of hadith. And that's kind of what I'm referring to there above when I was saying that some of his teachers even chose to narrate from him. They recognized the significance of his scholarship and that he had collected isnads, which is a term in hadith about who you're narrating from. And he had collected so many that some of his teachers recognized that he was a better scholar than they were at a point. And so they would start, when they were reciting hadith, they would then, instead of having themselves in the narration, they would replace themselves with him in it. So, very fascinating thing. But this is an important thing because not all of the imams of fiqh, who we mentioned last week, were both a fiqhi and a muhaddith. It was only Imam Malik and Imam Ahmad Hanbal. Imam Shafi'i and Imam Abu Hanifa were both masters of fiqh, but they were not masters of hadith as well. So you will not find them in chains of narration of hadith, whereas you will find Imam Malik and you will find Imam Ahmad Hanbal in narrations of hadith sciences. So just one thing to point out there. So today we're talking about purification, and I just wanted to go over some terminology because we're going to go back and forth between the Arabic text and we're going to and the being Muslim text, and they both translate things. I think I mentioned this last week, a little bit differently. So just some of the key terms: wudu, very common term that we hear, means cleanliness. It is translated mostly in the being Muslim text as ritual purity, which in the Arabic text is tahara. And they're kind of very similar terms. To broaden our scope a little bit, tahara is kind of the overarching term. Remember I said at the beginning we're looking at the fiqh of tahara today, fiqh of tahara. So that term combines all of them. Whereas if you're kind of bring it down, wudu is referring to simply just the main washing aspects. Wudu, though, in its more colloquial term, refers to all of it as well. So just something to be aware of as we're discussing them. I will try to refer to tahara as the overarching term, and wudu more to the specific term for purposes of the class. But they can branch around and be fairly flexible. Najasa and hadith are also two terms that you'll see. Hadith you won't find in this book, but that's the term that most of the fiqh books actually use for impurities. Najasa is the more common term colloquially, and it is more directly related to filth or something dirty. Impurity is kind of, again, the more overarching term with hadith, and najasa the more defined, precise term. Is that clear? Cool. Good. Alhamdulillah. And a very important thing that I need to point out, there is a difference in what we're talking about between ritual purity, ritual states of purity, and physical cleanliness. Alhamdulillah, we're gifted with a divine inspiration in the Quran, which is where all of this comes from ultimately, our source text, right? That and the hadith, the lifestyle of the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in this being divine revelation, in the practice of cleanliness and purification of oneself, although it is for a spiritual purpose that we do the tahara, the wudu, its main purpose is purely that. The secondary benefits that it provides of physical cleanliness, which, mashallah, everyone who is Muslim, you could tell that they're going to be a much more clean person than someone who is a non-Muslim. It was one of the things that just astounded me when I traveled abroad and visited Muslim communities in Turkey and Egypt. The cleanliness of the cultures, of the Islamic cultures in those countries, vastly better, hygienically, than those here in America. And it's just an amazing thing, and it comes purely from these things that we're going to study today. But there is a distinction between ritual purity and physical cleanliness. The purposes are distinctly different, and just want to make sure we acknowledge that. So this is a little bit of a diagram. This is actually from our Being Muslim text. Actually, it's towards the end. I think this is actually on page 54. This is kind of describing a little bit of how the layers to this work out. So ritual purity, this is our kind of fitra, right? Our innate natural state. We have a baby. She was born into cleanliness. However, as we live our lives, things happen, life happens, and we will go from that state of cleanliness, ritual purity, into states of impurity. And those are broken down into minor and major, which we'll go over today. And there are ways of bringing yourself out of those back into purity, which then is important because that is where we need to be when we're going into next week's topic, which is the salah, the prayer. There's some other things as well, but that's the primary important cause. Wudu, that smaller term, not the overarching term like tahara, but the wudu, ritual, washing, this will cover almost everything. The minor ritual impurities are the biggest category, so that is where we start with. And then the major ritual impurities require a ghusl, which is a full washing instead of the smaller washing. And there are different things that cause it, and we're going to go through all of that today. So we're going to start with the nullifiers. And there are two types of things that nullify wudu. Those are regular impurities and things which lead to or can cause impurities. And that kind of goes off of a fiqh statement, or I guess a principle would be the right word, that which leads to haram can become haram itself. And this can broaden into a ton of different things, but that's kind of the basic principle behind that which leads to impurities or may cause impurities, being things that actually are nullifiers for the wudu itself. Okay? So we're going to start with the impurities. These are about 5, I believe. Yeah. Prosthetic fluid, genital discharge, urine, excrement, and passing a gas. The easy way to remember this is that they come from the 2 lower orifices. So anything that comes out of the genitals and anything that comes out of the anus. Very simple. Those are the major reasons of what causes impurities. And then this topic is much bigger. Those things which lead to or may cause impurities. And in this one, I'll just preface and say there are aspects of this which will differ between madhab. If you're looking at the Shafi'i madhab, they may tend to be a little bit more strict on a couple of these things. And the Hanafi madhab, they tend to be a little bit more lenient on a couple of these things. But for the most part, this is probably about 90% going to be the same across all Islamic science schools. Sleep is the first category. So all types of heavy sleep are things which will break your wudu. And the reason for that actually is partly related to some of these other ones that we'll have down here, the fainting and the insanity and intoxication. It's due to us not being conscious, that loss of consciousness. Short and light sleep, those will not break wudu. But for a longer and light sleep, wudu is something that would be recommended. So one thing that you may commonly see is brothers who will come to the masjid and they will stay here for in between the times of salah. A very common one is going to be from the maghrib to the asr, right? Very common, you'll see that. They're probably reading, maybe they're doing some afkar, things like that, and they doze off for a moment. If it's just a light sleep like that, alhamdulillah, they don't have to worry about getting up when they hear the iqamah or the adhan or what it is and rushing off to go hurriedly make wudu. It's okay. If they have a very, and this is a common one that you'll actually probably see during Ramadan, if they're in that time between, you might take a nap that's actually going to be a deep sleep. And you'll just have to be careful of this and conscious on yourself. But if it is one during Ramadan, we're often tired because we're up all night for some extra prayers, right? And that time is a perfect opportunity often where, whether we like it or not, we might just pass out and take a nap. So that's just something to be aware of when it's just a short thing, very light. We don't have to worry about it. Wudu is not, it's recommended, but it's not required. But anything beyond that would break wudu. So the other ones that have to do kind of with the loss of consciousness, fainting obviously. This can happen if you're in a fight. We have lots of stories from the times of the companions of the Prophet, right? In the battles where they got knocked unconscious for a time. Great example of that. Fainting in that kind of a situation, or other kinds. Some people have issues with blood sugars, and it might cause them to pass out, or other conditions. Epilepsy is another one that can cause faintings. So medical conditions as well can be a reason for that, which means they may need to have wudu maybe more excessive than others need for that. And there's things that some people can do with that. Insanity. This one maybe less common, but this can relate from anything to being just regular mental conditions, mental health disorders. We now live in a time where we can actually quantify these in terms of health care sciences, and have much better diagnoses for these things. There's some great, I know in terms of women's organizations, Rabata is a wonderful Islamic scholarship program. It's women-focused that has done great work in studying these things. Yaqeen Institute has also put in a lot of effort into studying some of these things as well. And those are some good scholars that I would recommend going to in terms of help if you or someone you know has issues with those types of things. Because they can help in terms of this. And being able to know how to make wudu if this is something that you suffer from regularly is something that can be very helpful and provide a lot of good peace for. Intoxication, this inquiry talks about mostly, of course, alcohol, but all forms of intoxications, all forms of drugs. Some medications can as well, and in terms of those, you will want to consult with an Islamic scholar on those things. If medically it's prescribed for you, you have a bit of an exemption with that, but then at the same time, having the wudu is very important. Locally, I would very much recommend talking with our own wonderful brother, Sidi Omar Saeed. He's a dentist, but he's studied wonderful things and still works regularly in the healthcare community at OSHU. Additionally, we have his Sheikh Qasim up in Seattle, who has another medical degree and is the resident chaplain for the Seattle area and gets lots of hospital calls. So he has seen quite a lot there. So both of them are quite good, and I would recommend for local issues in terms of healthcare related things. Apostasy. This one, very straightforward. If you leave Islam, you are breaking wudu. And that's based off of theology, Aqidah purposes there. But they're very much related. Doubt, and this is one which I think probably is one of the more common ones. Do we remember whether we had wudu or not? Well, then we start doubting, right? We start questioning that in our own mind. And that could become a serious issue for some people. So what my scholars were telling me was that 50-50 is kind of the thing. If you're like, I'm pretty sure I did it, then it's best to just go with that assumption. You're good, especially if you're in a point where you have little time before the prayer or the prayer is running out. Go with the assumption that you're pretty sure that you did it. But if you're less than 50% certain, then it's good. And that can also do with, maybe you're thinking maybe I had one of the major impurities we were just talking about come on to me, and I can't remember. Did I use the bathroom? Did I make wudu after I used the bathroom? I can't remember. Things like that, right? So that's an important one. And then the last one, this is the touching related one, which is quite a broad and gets broken down into a few different categories. And this is one that, again, can differ between madhab, particularly in the relational aspects. But in general, touching one's penis with one's palm, the inside of the fingers or the sides of the fingers will break wudu. The back of the hand does not. Interaction with the opposite gender. And there's two main aspects of this one: intention related, and then the aspect of touch. And the scholars, this is where they had their differences of opinion. Imam Malik tended to take both of them into consideration. Imam Shafi would be very much focused on the touch aspect. And Imam Abu Hanifa was very much related on the intention aspect. So again, just kind of differentiation there in the schools. But in the Maliki perspective, pleasure is intended and found in physical interaction with opposite sex, then you will break wudu. If pleasure is found but not intended, then you break wudu. And if the pleasure is intended but not found, you still break wudu. And then the only one is at the bottom is if it is not intended and not found, then wudu is nullified. The main differences here are...
female now. We're talking about female, right?
This is interactions with the opposite sex, although...
From male to female.
Yes, male to female. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's correct. Any questions on these?
No.
Before we move on. Good? Alhamdulillah. All right. Things that do not nullify wudu. And this is an important thing that is covered. I don't know if it's mentioned in the Being Muslim book. I don't remember if it is or not. But it is covered in the Maliki text. And so I did want to mention this because there's a few of these things that we don't often think about. So touching one's buttocks does not nullify wudu. Touching the testicles does not nullify wudu. Touching the genitals of children does not nullify wudu. And this is an important category because parents who are caretakers of the children often have to deal with dirty diapers and all that mess that combines. So that process, that is a mercy, you could say, that Allah has granted upon us, that when we are cleaning up after them, that doesn't break our own wudu. Now, obviously, we would want to clean ourselves from the physical impurities. That is an important thing. But it does not break wudu itself. Vomiting. And I believe this actually differs between the schools. I think the Hanafi actually does say that vomiting will break your wudu, but in the Maliki it does not. Vomit itself does. So if you have vomit on you, you would want to clean that off. That would be something called najasa, right? Filth. Yeah. Eating camel meat. I think this one also differs between a couple of the madhab. But in Maliki, dietary restrictions are a little bit looser. So yeah, camel meat is not something that breaks wudu. Cupping and bleeding, in terms of therapeutic issues, this is something, in terms of fiqh, we're supposed to encourage things that better one's health and discourage things that harm one. And those who find therapeutic relief through cupping and bleeding, then that would be something that does not break your wudu. In general, bleeding, I believe it's dirham is what my scholar was just telling me actually last week. More than a dirham will break wudu, and at that point you would want to, it's a more advanced aspect of the fiqh than is covered in these books. And again, I think that's one that kind of differs a little bit. But for the most part, the main things that we're going to encounter, bleeding issues are usually related to women with their menstrual cycles, as opposed to men.
I wanted to say.
Yeah. But it's not always the case. You might have an injury, right? You might have a wound. And there's the famous case of the Sahaba who had a head injury that was wounded. And the companions at the time tried to make their own ijtihad. Right? Do you remember what that term was from last week? What is ijtihad?
Ijtihad is like researching the masala and trying to find a solution.
Yeah.
By understanding the Quran and Sunnah based on these two, right?
It's the independent reasoning based off of that.
Right.
Yes, correct. Yeah, so what the Sahaba did in this instance was that they used their knowledge of what the Prophet had done and from the Hadith, and then applied ijtihad. They made their own independent judgment on the situation, and they asked the brother, they said, no, you need to make wudu. Well, he made wudu, he got an infection, and he died. And the Prophet said that was a bad decision that they had made. So that gives us the example today that in cases like that, medical issues, bleeding, is not something that it may break your wudu, but wudu is not the solution for it. In which case, we'll find out here in a little bit, there's something called tayammum, which would be the thing that would be recommended in such a situation instead. Okay? SubhanAllah. Laughing in salah. This is something that will break your salah, but it does not break your wudu. So just a distinction there. And then for women, you notice before I was only talking about men touching their genitals, right? Mm-hmm. For women, touching their genitals is okay, so long as it's not for the purpose of driving pleasure. If that sort of thing is going on, if there's fondling, then wudu does become obligatory. Okay? There's a little distinction there. Again, these are related specifically to the Maliki madhab. This is stuff coming from Imam Malik, the Amal of Medina, the consensus there that was in the community of the Prophet. The reason we want to be in a state of wudu is primarily for these threefold things. Salah. We're required to make our salah 5 times a day. We'll be studying that more next week, inshallah. But salah is probably the primary reason why wudu is such an important thing for us to study. The second is tawaf. What is tawaf?
Well,
It's like walking around the Kaaba.
Yes, it's the circumambulation that happens around the Kaaba.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So if you're there on Hajj or Umrah, then you have to be in a state of wudu in order to make tawaf. That is a requirement. Yeah. And then touching a mustaf is also a requirement for wudu. So you're not supposed to touch a mushaf, and that's an Arabic Quran,
Yeah.
in the original Arabic, without being in a state of wudu. There are different conditions. This is actually a reason why you will find so many mushaf today that are actually printed in both Arabic and English or another language. And the reason for that is because if it's printed in another language, it's not considered a mushaf anymore. It's considered a book of tafsir.
First,
Tafsir, yeah, a commentary.
yeah.
And that actually then allows one to be able to touch it without a state of wudu. And the main reason why that is important is, of course, women on their periods. They need to have access to the Quran during that time for purposes of obviously the benefits of it, but then also if they're ones who are hafiz and reviewing memorization things, it's important. And the way to do that is to use a tafsir Quran there, where it has the translation. Yes, you had a question.
Yeah, so was that like confirmed by all the imams or some of them?
As far as I'm aware, this is the same in all three madhab. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, what do we make wudu with? Water. Water is very important. Yeah, maya, ma'a, right? Yeah, I'll get that right. Wudu is with water. So the study of water is something that the scholars have done quite a lot on, and you will always find the beginning of our section here. It's like page 37, 8, and 9. I think it's talking about water. So there are mainly two types of water: pure, unmixed water is our first category. This is good for wudu, and then mixed water. Mixed water is not good for wudu. And mixed water falls into two categories. It's mixed when when there is an impurity that changes the color, taste, or smell. And that's the main thing to remember. Color, taste, or smell. If those things have changed in the water, then it is mixed and impure. It is not something that you can use for wudu. There's one main exemption to this. Anyone think what that is?
The seawater?
Seawater, yes. Salt water in the sea is considered pure and unmixed. So that is good.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we actually have reports that the Prophet, he actually went to, it was the Gulf there, right? Gulf of Aqaba, I think. I forget which side it is. Right there. And we know Badr is near the sea. It was around that area. I don't know if it was at the time of Badr, but it was around that area when he was there, and he actually made wudu using the salt water of the sea. So that's an important thing. But yeah, color, taste, and smell, that's the main thing to look for in terms of water. We actually had a question, I just wanted to mention this one, that came up regarding swimming pools. It's a very common thing that we see here in modern society. And there is debate among the scholars as to whether pool water is considered mixed water or not.
I think it's mixed because it has chlorine in it.
Yeah, no, they had a big debate, and it's currently one that's still going on in the Maliki madhab.
And also kids pee in the pool.
Yeah, and those are some reasons. So that is something that I will just let you guys know of, that there is a debate. Some scholars consider it okay, some scholars consider it not okay. Take your own perspective on that and go with it. The main thing is that those scholars who do say it is okay, they generally will say that if you have another option available, then go for that instead, as opposed to using the pool water. But if necessary, then yeah, you have the pool water there, and that would be okay, kind of thing. The second category of the mixed water is when water is mixed with another pure substance. So as opposed to it being mixed with something that's a najasa, like someone peeing or pooping in the pool water, then you have things like milk. Milk is another pure substance. Well, if you're mixing water and milk, you've unfortunately impurified the water. Now that's still going to be a pure substance, which is fine for things like cooking, drinking, baking, bathing, whatever. But that would not be permissible to use for wudu itself. Make sense? Cool. A common one, I think, is rose water. I hear a lot about rose water questions that people say, oh, is rose water permissible for wudu? And that would be an example here of one that is mixed with a pure substance.
Right.
Yeah. And then
what about rainwater? Is it pure?
Rainwater?
Yeah.
Rainwater is pure. Yep. Rainwater is pure. Also, muddy water is considered pure.
What is that?
Muddy water. So if you have water that's on the ground and it looks muddy or dirty, well, that dirt is from the ground, and as we'll get to here in a bit when we get to Tayammum, that ground is also clean and pure for purifying. So muddy water is actually permissible for wudu. The thing I wanted to highlight here at the end, the other thing that can happen with water is that you make wudu with it. Well, the water that you make wudu with should not be then used for making wudu a second time. That water is then considered impure. In fact, it's also recommended that you don't get the droplets of that water onto your clothing, because that could be considered najasa in some cases. And that comes from a hadith of the Prophet, I believe, in which it says that as we were making wudu, it's our sins that are falling off us and being washed away. So spiritually what's happening, and this is again why there's a distinction between the elements of the ritual cleanliness and the physical cleanliness, right? That wudu is purifying our spiritual state. And with that, sins can be leaving us even, as the Prophet said, subhanAllah. Okay, so now we're going to start getting into wudu, and I wanted to mention beforehand, there's a technical term, and this is defined in Being Muslim book for us, which is excellent. There's a distinction between wiping and washing. Can anyone kind of hint at think of what that might be?
Well, wiping, like, let's say your hand is wet and you just wipe.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Just washing, you with the actual water.
Yep. Yeah, so washing is when the actual water comes on you. Wiping can mean just dipping your hand in water and then rubbing with the wet hand. Okay? And you will see these two terms being used, so important is to know the distinction between them. All right, so the obligations of wudu. And we're just going to focus on the obligations for this class. There are, of course, the sunnah, the things that the Prophet himself did as well. There are, beyond the sunnah, there are other recommended things. There are other things that are permissible. There are some things that are disliked as well. We are just going to focus simply on the obligations. And I'll have a slide at the very end that kind of branches out into some of the other categories, because as we go through this, you'll be like, wait, what about this? What about this? Because we see and we do these things, we've been Muslim for a while, alhamdulillah. But the obligations are actually very small. Which is again one of those mercies from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that the things that are required are at ease for us. Alhamdulillah. So these are the obligations for wudu. First and foremost is the intention, the niyyah. And the intention should be to prepare oneself and to put oneself into the state so that one can do the things that are only required for wudu, which may be salah, reading the Musaf, things like that, and then tawaf, of course, if we're there. But yes, one should make the intention for doing their wudu for a good purpose, of course. And then after that, we have the washing of the face. Washing of the face is very important. Again, this is the washing part. So it's not rubbing, not wiping with water. It's actually washing. Water has to get on the face. Washing the hands up to and including the elbow. So that is the entire hand going all the way up and including one's elbow. Okay? So don't just come up to the elbow, include all the way, all past the joint. InshaAllah. And then wiping of the whole head. So for the head, this is wiping now we're talking about. This one is dip the hands in water, get them wet, and you come all the way over your head. Okay? And the front to back motion is very good. The book has got some really good examples in terms of pictures as to how to do this, definitions of what's considered face, what's considered head, etc. So I highly recommend looking through those examples. And I'm actually going to do an example for you guys of what this wudu would look like as well, inshallah. Yes, it's in this book. Next is washing of the feet, up to and including the ankles. So for our feet, again, important thing is to include the ankle as part of the foot. I know how you could perhaps speak to this a bit more, but in the Arabic, that's actually part of the reasons for it, is that the term hand in Arabic can include the elbow, and the term foot in Arabic includes the ankle. So this is why in English we have to break these things down and make sure we combine, because if we just translate and say hand, well, now we're just focused in terms of English. We don't even consider the wrist, the hand. We've defined things so much in this language. Arabic, which is the language which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose to give His divine inspiration to us in, defines these things differently, obviously. So important to make sure to include the ankle in the foot washing. The uninterruptedness of the wudu, also very important. So the common example of this one is you're in the process of making wudu, and your phone goes off, and it's your mom calling. You got to take that call. So you pick up the phone, and you're on the phone with her for 10, 15 minutes. Well, by that time, your limbs have dried up, and they're no longer wet. You maybe don't even remember, did I do my head? Did I do my hands? What part was it? What step was I at? So it's important not to have the wudu be an interrupted thing. So keep it uninterrupted, keep it all together, flow through the steps. Sequentially is an aspect of the sunnah, I believe, but the uninterrupted nature of it is an obligation. It's considered an obligation. And then the last part is including the rubbing with the washing. So now this is important. All of the times that we've mentioned the washing, getting the water on us, now also include rubbing. So think of it as washing and wiping the face, washing and wiping the hands, just wiping, washing and wiping the feet, because that's what the rubbing part is basically going to define for us. Does that make sense?
Rubbing with the washing.
Yeah, rubbing with the washing.
So can't I just put my feet under the water?
No. Yeah. And that's actually an important thing to take into consideration, because for some people, it becomes an issue bending down to reach the feet. Mobility, flexibility is not the same with everyone. So in that kind of a situation, then it might be that you need to be looking at another condition other than wudu. You might need to be taking an exemption, because it's not, okay, just turn the faucet on, get the feet wet, you're done. You actually need to be able to reach down and rub them in order for it to be permissible and accepted. That isn't the obligation. Yes?
What about like the nose and the ears?
Yes! Great, I knew this question was going to come up.
Yeah.
This is important. It is a good thing. It's considered a sunnah. It's not considered an obligation, at least in the Maliki madhab. I believe actually in Hanafi it is considered, the mouth is considered an obligation. It's either considered an obligation or it's considered a sunnah that the Prophet did so many times, so regularly that we need to do it. Imam Malik, just kind of going into some of the reasons why he did this, he took only these as the obligations, was because he took these based off of what it says in the Ayat al-Quran, where it defines what the steps of wudu are, and it doesn't include the mouth in that. There are numerous hadith, which is correct, that talk about the importance of washing the mouth and including that in the steps that the Prophet ﷺ did, which is why Imam Malik included that in the Sunnah. But it is not considered an obligation in the Maliki madhab.
What about the nose?
Same with the nose. The nose, actually, I think, is considered in Maliki recommended thing and not a sunnah. But the mouth is considered the sunnah, I believe. Yeah. Yeah. I have a slide that actually includes these on it at the very end. So if you wait until then we'll actually see the full breakdown with all the stuff that's missing that we're thinking about.
The interesting thing is that when we were kids, they teach us, we watch the mouth, if there's anything haram we heard. So it has like another spiritual meaning, not just like physical.
Yeah. So I wanted just to give a physical example for you guys of what this wudu would look like. This is Dasani. It says purified water enhanced with minerals for a pure, fresh taste. So we're looking at our water here. Is this pure water or is this mixed?
It's pure.
Pure, yes.
It's pure.
But it's enhanced with minerals.
Well, most of them now, all the water now is enhanced.
Yeah. This is so minor of an addition to the water, and it's with stuff, minerals, that would be considered clean anyway. So it would be falling under the purified mixed with the pure substance if we were to break it down to that, but this is still considered permissible. So this is permissible for wudu. And this is actually a half liter, which is almost exactly what the Prophet ﷺ would be using when he made wudu. This is it. Okay? If you look at it, it's not that much water. And when we think about how much water we use today. Right?
Yeah, that's
SubhanAllah.
They didn't have that much water then anyway.
Yeah.
So that might be.
If you wear a watch, you will probably want to take off your watch. If you have a ring, silver rings for men are permissible. One in the Maliki Madhab, and you do not have to take a ring off if it is a halal piece of jewelry for you to wear. For women, they can wear whatever they want. There are no regulations with women in terms of jewelry. They are permitted to beautify themselves. So all of that is halal for them, and they don't have to take it off either. That is okay. But for men, only one silver ring would be permissible. So the first thing, if we're in ourselves a state of impurity, we would not want to put our hands then in the water and impure the whole water. So you'd want to take some water just to wash your hands. And I'm trying to collect here so as partly not to spill as well. And a note on the intention element. Enough on this. There are many beautiful dua that one can make for the intention. And if you find that helpful, then that is a recommended thing to do. It's not required. And it's not required. I don't even know if it's recommended necessarily to say them out loud. If you're making wudu in a bathroom that is next to a toilet as well, it's probably not recommended to make any of those out loud anyway. When you're doing the hands, to include the rubbing, make sure you go in between the fingers. Okay? If you have long nails, try to get underneath them as well. And then including the wrist, very important. Okay? Alhamdulillah, we lifted the mask policy, but I'm just trying to be careful still because we have a little one at home. All right, now that the hands are clean, the first thing is the face. So take water. Actually, I'm going to grab another towel real quick. All right, so grab water. Splash yourself in the face with it. Get it good. And then once you've done that first splash, you've met the condition of washing the face. The water has hit the face, has touched the face. Then get into the rubbing with the washing, okay? And get the whole face, get under those eyebrows, eyelids, underneath the nose. If you don't have time, I'll put it that way. If you don't have time to do sunnah or recommended things like washing the mouth, washing the nose, make sure you get in this area, because if you're doing those other steps, you'd automatically be washing those areas. But if you're not, if you're having to skip those due to time, just so you make sure you have your obligations done, just make sure you wipe in these areas too. So that's good. Okay?
How many times? How many times?
Only one time is necessary for the obligation.
Okay.
You can do more. I believe sunnah is 3 times for most of these things. But one time is all there's obligatory. If you have a beard and it is thin, then you want to make sure you wet your hands and rub into the beard. If you have a thick beard, it's not necessary. And if your beard is long, it might be nice to just wash it down, but that would just be a recommended thing. It's not required. It's not considered part of the face if it's past your chin or underneath if you have a beard, for sure. Okay? So the next thing we had, washing the hands up to and including the elbow. So again, we got to get the water on them. So water is on, and in that process you can usually do a good bit of rubbing as well. Make sure you get the whole thing wet. We've already done our hands, alhamdulillah, so that one's good. But again, getting that water. The cupping motion is very important. And the sunnah was to actually use this instead of the Hanafiya, the taps that we have today. SubhanAllah. We're very spoiled in our abilities for this. So that's done. Again, only one time is obligatory. You can do more. Again, 3 I think is the sunnah or the recommended. But only one time is necessary. Wiping of the head. This one's not the washing. So if we just wet our hands, they're wet. And do the wiping motion all the way across. There is a sunnah of wiping back. You can do that if you wish. That again is not an obligation. So your wudu will be accepted without that. The feet, up to and including the ankles. Again, this one is, I'm going to do this over here. Trying to save you, Johannes, so you don't have to.
I'm just watching if you're going to buy a brand new carpet.
Okay. A distinction here is that it is important when you're doing your hands to get in between the fingers, right? For the toes, it's not a requirement. And I think this is, again, a mercy for us in terms of mobility issues for people to make it easier for us to fulfill this obligation. It's definitely permitted and probably even a recommended thing to go between the toes. And one would usually do this with their pinky, go like this. But this is not a required, it's not a part of an obligation for washing of the foot. And with that, we've done it uninterrupted. My arms, my face are still a little bit damp. I can feel it. Alhamdulillah. And that is the end of the wudu. If you can, try to keep your clothes dry. It helps your clothes, but then again, like I was saying before, in terms of the element of the spiritual nature of the wudu, with your sins then coming off onto your clothing, you would want to change your clothing and not then go rush and pray in these things. So, a very important thing, and inshallah, if at all, this encourages you to take a little bit of time. Make sure you come to the masjid early, probably even before the adhan, so that you have time, especially considering we only have one washroom on each side, both women's and the men's, so that you have time to make wudu. Or make it at home before you come, inshallah. And that's, of course, not always the case. Perhaps you'll pass gas in the car on the way here. It happens. So just things to keep conscious about. And that always helps us. This is a beautiful diagram that the Marquez that I study with put together, just covering the obligations, the art of wudu. So ghusl. So there are a few things, obviously, that wudu will not be sufficient for. And the important part here is ghusl is obligatory after the emission of semen, penetration of the male organ into the female, menstruation, and postnatal bleeding. So there's 4 primary reasons why we would need the ghusl. These happen everyone of adult age, which is kind of one of our preconditions that we talked about last week. So this is an important thing to talk about. There's one more that I did not include on here. Can anyone think of what that is?
I was talking about the ear.
The ears?
Yeah.
Going back, that would be something that is a recommended thing on the wudu.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, long traveling.
When traveling, long traveling, not necessary. Certainly, in terms of hygienic reasons, I can see a reason to take a good bath, and make it a wusul if you want, but that wouldn't be an obligation on long travel. The obligation that I missed putting on here is converting to Islam. So if one comes into Islam, one isn't born a Muslim, then what they would need to do is take a wusul because they're coming from a lifestyle of uncleanliness into Islam. Part of a thing that one would be done upon giving the shahada at that time, inshallah, or right after. So there are 5 obligations for the wusul. I will not be demonstrating this one. These are, of course, the intention. Very first and most important thing, the intention. Wetting the whole body. Rubbing the whole body. So both getting wet and rubbing, full rubbing. Very important. Uninterrupted. Again, not likely you're going to get a phone call from your mom while you're doing your bath or shower or whatever. But life happens. Maybe you're one with a baby at home and all of a sudden they start screaming and you got to turn off the shower and go rush and find out what's going on. So you'd have to go back and redo, start from the beginning at that point. Especially annoying if you've got long hair and trying to clean that and all that stuff. Which actually, speaking of that, that's an important thing. If you are taking a hygienic bath for the purpose of hygiene, you're probably going to be using things like shampoos, conditioners, soaps, things like that. Those are all things that when we're talking about our water would be mixed water. So those would not count for a wusul. Those are good things to include in your bathing, like just generic hygiene, but you would need to wash with just the water itself, wetting just the whole body, and rubbing just the whole body without any of that soap and stuff, in order for it to qualify as for the obligation of the wusul. Just an important thing to consideration. And then hair, like I was talking about, penetrating through the hair. Can be a little harder if you have long or a lot of hair, but just getting in, making sure that the scalp, give yourself a good scalp massage. That is sufficient enough. Okay, and tayammum. This is the last one, and this is something that can become very important, particularly for elderly, for those with health conditions, or for all of us if we are at a point where we are about to miss the salah. Tayammum becomes an obligation for everyone at that point. And that's something that can happen. So tayammum is obligatory in absence of water, when using water will be harmful, or to enter a state in which salah, touching mushaf, etc. becomes permissible. And like I said, for that one, your main issue is going to be timing. You had Asr. And then after Asr, you're like, okay, perfect time, I'm going to go take a nap. You wake up, it's 3 minutes before Maghrib about to come in. You're about to miss Asr Salah. I explained that wrong. Dhuhr, you sleep from Dhuhr and you skip, you make your Dhuhr Salah and you skip the Asr. You're still asleep and it's Maghrib and you're about to miss the Asr, right? At this point, you don't have time to run and go find the water, to make the wudu and catch the Salah at the same time. And as we'll cover next week, the requirement for catching the salah is make sure you get that first rakat done before the time comes in for the next one. You don't have that time. So what you do instead is the tayammum, because that one is a quick one, or can be quick, and it will cover the necessary spiritual cleanliness and purities that are important for just that one prayer, inshallah. Or if it's, I need to touch the mushaf for something and I don't have any water nearby me or something. Yeah. Whatever the situation is, again, a lot of this stuff, tayammum, is going to be very important for anyone who has medical conditions, mobility conditions, or particularly for those who are elderly. 4 parts of the obligations here. Again, the intention. And on this one, the intention cannot be to remove filth because the tayammum does not remove filth. That's not its purpose. All it's doing is kind of giving you a path onto that stage. So it's just intention can only be to make it lawful for you to make salah or one of the other things that you're doing. Wiping the face, again, important. And again, we're not going to talk about washing here. This is all wiping, so important to notice that. Wiping the face, wiping the hands to the wrist, and then the first patting, the darb of the earth. And I made sure to include this because this is a very contentious word sometimes, the darb. This is the word that is often very poorly mistranslated in the Quran, where it's talking about relationships with one's spouse, right? It's mistranslated often in English as striking or hitting. The word here is darb, and if anyone knows tayammum, then they should understand that this is not you being permitted to go and hit your wife at all. Tayammum is often done, and I actually brought an example of this with a rock, a stone. And if you're ever in West Africa, you will find every single masjid has a stone near the entryway for those who come in late to Salah, so they can catch it. This is a perfect example of what one would use. This is actually a salt rock, which is a earthy mineral, perfectly acceptable for tayammum. There's a lot of different things. The book actually goes into great detail on this, of what can and can't be used. The main thing is any solid, earthy, organic substance is permissible. And like I said, with the darb, you're not going to go hit this. You're not going to go punch this. You're not going to go strike this. Use this as your baseline when you're interpreting that, giving tafsir on that ayat al-Quran. Because this is definitely clear guidance for that. So yeah, first do something just like this, pat darb on the element of the stone. Wiping the face is the first thing in this situation. So after you've done your darb, do your good wipe on the face. And again, treat it as if it's water and you're doing the rubbing element. Okay, make sure to get into all of the portions. Okay. Then again, when you're doing the hands, get in between, just like you would if it was with water, and then going through to the wrist. Okay. And then giving the tips, of course, where the fingernails are and stuff. So, and again,
You don't do the arms?
you do not do the arms. It's not required. It would be considered a sunnah or a recommended thing. For the obligation, again, the importance I'm giving for this is with the obligations. The most common situation that Muslims will find themselves in where they need to do tayammum is catching the salah that they're about to miss. In which case, the speed of it is important, so just being able to do the 4 basic obligations is what you're going to do.
Just your hand on your face.
That's it. It's just the hands, including the wrist,
Good.
and the face,
No
and your
feet.
intention. Feet, head, not included. Yeah. Yeah. Is that clear?
Yeah, that's the first time I heard
Alhamdulillah.
that.
Alhamdulillah. Our teacher for this class, he also gave another example, which is one that I could see happening sometimes. Some of our brothers, they like to go out hunting in the seasons. Usually it's going to be in the fall and the winter. And in those situations, you might take your gear with you, but you're limiting your water supply because you don't want to carry in a lot, right? Maybe you'll be lucky to be able to catch some rainfall to drink, but if you're out there and you've only got a certain amount of water to drink, to live by, well, that could be your time to go back and stuff. And well, I'm gonna have to go back, or oh man, I'm in the middle of tracking this elk and I really want to catch it, and it's gonna take me, well, maybe another 6-12 hours. I've only got this amount of water left, and you might need that water to keep yourself sustained, right? in that kind of a situation, save that water for yourself. Do tayammum instead of using that water for wudu. That was the recommendations from Sheikh. Yes?
Yeah, what if there's no rock? What if just like there are trees or...
If you got ground, if there's even grass growing on it, there's earth underneath it. So just use that, and you're good.
But not the tree,
Yeah.
right?
The tree, wood you're not supposed to use. And there is a little bit of a difference of opinion on that from what I've found. But if you're out in nature, I mean, you're going to have ground underneath you pretty much everywhere. So just bend down, do your quick darb on the ground, and you're done. Okay? Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. All of this is a mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as we find next week when we get into the salah, all of this is so that we can be in our salah. We can enjoy our salah, and we can take the most benefit out of our salah. It is purely a mercy in granting us ease. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Here's the slide I was talking about. And we might have to get up close because it's pretty small. I do apologize. For the wudu, some of the sunnah acts, I'll just read these through. Starting with the washing, hands to wrists, rinsing the mouth, which we were talking about. Slightly inhaling waters through the nostrils. So this is considered a sunnah as well. Blowing water out of the nose, wiping head back to front. That's the re-wiping. Including the ears, the sunnah. A couple different things there. And the order, the progression of how you go through them. That is also considered sunnah. Other recommended things, saying the Bismillah. Doing the wudu itself in a clean area. Which generally we do our wudu in a bathroom where maybe our shower and our toilet also is. That is not a recommended thing to do. So if you have the ability in your homes to do it in somewhere else, I would encourage you to do so. If you don't, my recommendation would be at least to close the toilet seat and close the curtains or the doors or whatever you have to your showering area. Okay? Let's see here. Using as little water as possible. I'm going to actually talk more about that in a moment. Placing the water container to the right-hand side if it is open. And that is something I forgot, which would, as you saw as I was doing this, it would have actually enabled my flow a lot easier if it was on my right-hand side, particularly if you're right-handed. I guess it could be a little distance there if you're left-handed, but that does enable the flow much easier if it's towards your active dominant side, which the right hand was what the Prophet preferred. So, you know that. Washing limb for a second or third time is one of the recommended things. And beginning the front of the head when wiping it, and using the siwak, the toothstick, right? That's also a recommended issue as well. I know on that one, in some of the other madhabs, I believe they consider the siwak a sunnah, or even a recommended sunnah. For the wusul, some of the sunnah acts begin with washing the hands to the wrist, rinsing of the mouth, inhaling water through the nostrils, and then wiping the insides of the ears. Some of the recommended things and virtuous acts of the wusul can include removing apparent and major impurities from the bodies at the start of the wusul, doing wudu while doing wusul, washing the upper body before the lower body, washing the head 3 times, washing the right sides before the left, and using as little water as possible. Now, just in terms of that little water as possible thing, I think this is an important thing for us to consider, particularly in this time. We talk a lot about going green in our society these days and sustainability. The amount of water that we use is absurd compared to places in the world where one of the main things that we talk about often during Ramadan is, we're going to donate to this place somewhere maybe in Asia or Africa or South America and give them the money to drill a well. Actually give them access to water like we have the privilege of here in this country, subhanAllah. One of the things that's mentioned in terms of both the wusul and the wudu is using as little water as possible is a recommended thing. It's actually discouraged to use a lot of water. This is about as much water as the Prophet used when he made wudu. This is half a liter. 2 liters, so 4 water bottles is all he would use when making wusul. And there's a famous narration that one time, the Prophet, he was making the Iqamah, or either he or somebody else was making the Iqamah for the Salah, and the Prophet, he remembered that he was in a state of major impurity, and he needed to make a whistle. And so he went, he made whistle, and was back before the Iqamah ended. SubhanAllah.
Wow.
Yeah. Again, not that we could necessarily do that. Again, with 4 water bottles, you're making your whistle and you're back before the Iqamah ends. SubhanAllah. But this is what we should be striving for when we are talking about things that secular society is really, really championing in terms of sustainability, environmental issues, right? We have the best example, as always, in our own Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and these are things that we should pick up on and try to emulate in our own lives. In terms of tayammum, the order of the wiping is one of the sunnah aspects. Patting the earth for a second time. You saw me doing that naturally as I was doing this, just a double tap is good. And then wiping from the wrists to the elbows, so including the elbows, this is a sunnah for the tayammum. Saying the Bismillah, recommended, as well as wiping of the right hand before the left hand, wiping the outer portion of the arms before the inner portion of the arms, and wiping of the front part before the end part. Make sense?
Yes.
Alhamdulillah. Lastly, I just want to mention some of the aspects that these are things that can help us with sincerity in our purification, and things that, again, we could avoid. I mentioned this one on here again, using too much water during our ablution. Waswasa, whisperings, right? These are things usually from the Satan. They can also come from the nafs too. These are things that we want to try to avoid. Usually these things come from ignorance of the sunnah, ignorance of fiqh, things like that. So inshallah, this class is something that can be of benefit. And alhamdulillah, we're recording it so that if people aren't here, they can review it or watch it as well. Inshallah, maybe this is something that we'll be able to do every year. But having these reminders is for the purpose of reminding not just me teaching the class, but you as well, and everyone in the community, so that we can prevent ourselves from having these doubts, right? These thoughts, these whisperings going on within us. Not being focused during our ablution as well. The amount of concentration, this is a quote from a scholar, the amount of concentration in our salah equals the amount of concentration in making wudu. So if we're focusing ourselves so much on having certainty in our salah, we should make sure that we have an equal amount in our wudu, because that wudu is what gets us to be able to make salah. All right? SubhanAllah. And then waiting too long to make a wusul invites that waswasa, right? Increasing the fear of one's nafs, and lessens the blessings in one's movement. Important. And then, of course, lastly, the blessings in the movements, wudu strengthens our body in terms of spiritual. But of course, as I was saying at the beginning of this class, since we are people who wash ourselves generally 5 times a day at minimum, this is so far beyond. We were doing this before the Middle Ages, before the Dark Ages of Western society in Europe, who was going through a plague because they did not understand hygiene, right?
Yes.
SubhanAllah. The blessings involved in this, it strengthens our body on a spiritual, and I will certainly say physical nature.
Yes.
It increases our provisions, our rizq, right? And causes the angels to love us. And it protects from sins, because it is washing those sins away. Wudu is a weapon of the believer. We hear often dua is a weapon of the believer. Wudu is also a weapon of the believer. So make use of this. Practice it, learn it. It's fairly easy. Like I said, there's a lot more to it. We barely touched on just briefly going over some of the sunnah, the recommended, and there's more to it than that. I just wanted to focus on the obligations because that is what gets us to next week, which is the salah, inshallah. So next week, inshallah, we'll talk about the salah. I believe it is time for the adhan, right?
Yes.
And the iqamah, inshallah. One thing I will mention, I think I have this in here. Tonight is mid-Shaban, which is a very blessed night. Maybe I have it. Let's see.
Should night of Shaban?
It's the middle of Shaban
Middle of
tonight. Yeah.
Shaban.
Oh, here we go. This is one of my teachers. He's in Abu Dhabi right now. Oh boy. The screen is so big. Yeah. Here we go. Enlarge it. Here we go. 15th night of Shaban. There's a beautiful dua here, and I might just leave this up for anyone who wants to read through this, the bottom parts of the English. But this is a really important night. Some of the scholars say that outside of Laylatul Qadr and the last 10 nights of Ramadan, this is one of the most blessed nights of the year. So any nafla, any extra salah that you could make tonight, it's a very good night to make up salah, making istighfar, any of those things. Some of the scholars, they say that the practice of many of the scholars to recite Surah Yasin 3 times tonight. And this is a dua then here below that would be read or recited between those. 3 intentions are given for reciting of Surah Yasin. Surah Yasin the first time with the intention of being blessed with a long life spent in obedience to Allah. A second time in recitation with the intention that calamities be diverted. And a third time is recited with the intention of not being in need of people and being blessed with a good ending. InshaAllah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us with good health. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless our wives and our children. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us ease in our religion and in our daily lives. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala free us from any of our calamities. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us good, long lives with good health for all of us and our families. InshaAllah. InshaAllah. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring us back again next week, where we will study, InshaAllah, the obligations of Salah.
Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah.
Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum.
How much I owe for the book?
Those are free. Alhamdulillah.
This is free?
Alhamdulillah.
Oh, man.